Hi, my name is Autif Kamal, and this is another workshop on logic and reasoning. This one is on terms, namely translating metaphors into literal terms. Now, the reason why I'm going over this is because, in general, terms which are used to refer to exactly what they're supposed to refer to are easier to understand than words that are not used to refer to exactly what they're supposed to refer to. And that is exactly what metaphors do. They call something what it isn't. Okay? The author of a metaphor can make a statement or words mean whatever they want to in a metaphor. And because it can mean whatever they want it to mean, it's open to mistaken assumptions by the audience and misinterpretations. So an example is, her home was a prison. Now, in order for this metaphor to be meaningful, there must be some similarity which home has with a prison. Does this home have cold, hard floors? Does it lack windows? Does the kitchen serve gruel or really bad food? Does the person living in this home live figuratively or literally in shackles? Only when it's made explicit what similarity home has with a prison will it be known what exactly this metaphor means. Okay? What would be more obvious is if instead it stated, she cannot leave her home. She is prohibited and unable to leave her home. Only by saying something like that will we know what her home has in common with a prison, namely her inability to leave it. Okay? Now, in this observe step, I'm going to give you some steps to follow to get an idea of what a metaphor might mean. But in the end, you can only know exactly what a metaphor means when the author tells you what they meant by their metaphor. In any case, here's the metaphor. He is my east, my west, and my compass. The first step is you need to realize that he is not literally his or her east, west, and compass. In the second step, you have to stop and think, generally, what could he have in common with east, west, and compass? Or is there only one thing in that metaphor which he would have something in common with? Okay, well here we have a human-made object, a compass. So we need to think, what is the main purpose which a compass is used for? Well, a compass is used for guiding. So then what this metaphor might mean is that he is my guide. Okay? It's much more obvious now what is meant by that metaphor if that's what it means. And if we state it that way. Okay, and then you can go on further. You can make this more precise by saying exactly, or asking, both asking and saying how exactly he is this person's guide. Okay, that would make it more precise and less ambiguous. Okay, now there's such thing as a meaningless metaphor. A metaphor which is meaningless doesn't have a obvious likeness between the words that are compared. So for example, it's raining cats and dogs. It's not obvious what comparison is being made between raining cats and dogs. And that's what makes this metaphor meaningless. Now before I go on to your independent practice, I want to emphasize what is an impractical and a practical application of a metaphor. Now, it's impractical to use a metaphor to explain something if the terms you would use to explain something correctly are literal, you know what those words are, and the individual you're explaining it to understands the literal usage of those words. Okay? That's when it's pointless to use a metaphor, because it would be easier for them to understand what you mean if you use your words literally in that case. But a case in which it is practical to use a metaphor is if either, number one, you're not sure which words to use which have a literal meaning, or the person you would convey the information to or give an explanation to doesn't know what the words you would use would literally refer to. Okay, now I'll give you an example. I was talking to a friend about a movie I wanted to check out. It's called Rise of the Guardians. They had no idea of what Rise of the Guardians was about, but they had seen the Avengers, so I told them, well, Rise of the Guardians is the Avengers with fairy tale characters. Okay, and I later explained, like, it has Sandman, it has Santa Claus, Easter Bunny, Jack Frost, the Tooth Fairy, and so on. Okay, now, is Rise of the Guardians literally the Avengers? No, but they have something in common, namely a team of heroes fighting for a good cause, or what is depicted as being a good cause. Okay, and that is an example of the practical use for a metaphor. Okay, now here you have two metaphors. One of them is meaningful, the other is meaningless. First, you got to figure that out, and then after you do that, for the meaningful metaphor, following the first observed step, where I showed you steps you could follow to try to get an idea of what a metaphor might mean, I want you to translate a meaningful metaphor into literal terms. I'll give you a moment to work on that. If you need more time, you can pause the video. Otherwise, I will move on to the answers, which I will do right now. Okay, so days stand behind open window panes. I made that metaphor up, and I had no idea what it meant when I said it. I don't know what it means for days to stand, what it means for them to stand behind open window panes. I have no idea what that means literally, so I couldn't tell you what that metaphor means. So this metaphor is meaningless. Now for this metaphor, the inside of the car was a refrigerator. First, we need to realize that a car is not literally a refrigerator. And then we need to take a step back and think about what is it that a car could have in common with a refrigerator. Then we need to realize, again, this is a human-made object, a refrigerator. So we need to think of, usually, generally, what is the main purpose of a refrigerator? Well, it's for keeping food cold. So one possible translation we get is that the inside of the car was cold. And again, you could get more precise. You could say, how cold was it? What was the temperature? You could also say which particular part of the car was cold, or was it just the entire car that was cold? Okay, and that's an example of translating a metaphor into literal terms. And again, I want to emphasize that we could only truly know exactly what a metaphor means if we could ask the author what they meant by it. In other words, getting them to say in literal terms what they said in a metaphor. Okay, now for additional practice, you can go to google.com, type in metaphor examples. You don't have to look necessarily just for statements which are entirely metaphors. You could also look for sentences which contain a single term which is used metaphorically. Whatever the case may be, that's what you can do to get some additional practice in translating metaphorical terms or sentences into literal terms or sentences. Okay, so next up I will expand on ambiguous terms. When I first talked about it, I talked about the ambiguity of terms in isolation of sentences, but the thing is, we always see terms when used in a sentence, and there's actually two ways in which a term can be used ambiguously, either because of the meaning of the term itself, or because of how the words in a sentence are arranged. Sometimes how the words in a sentence are arranged can make a term in that sentence have different meanings or interpretations, and that's called lexical ambiguity. So we'll go into both of those types of ambiguity further in the next video. Alright, thank you.